On tonight's episode, Glutton versus Gluttony, I will be consuming expired IPAs. Let's see what's wrong with this one. There was dust on it when I got it. Flat. Oh. Somehow flat, but also erupting. This one's a winner. For $2, they call it the holiday special. Oh, they've got a lot of them across the street. I love those fellas. This one's for you, Sam. You're a real one. Gorgath, a city only in name, for none would claim to dwell there. A battlefield in form and function, and to which endless columns of damned men are fed to oil the war machine. None can say when the battle began, and many are those that say it had no beginning. It is an echo of a battle yet to come, or the shadow of a war fought out of time, or reflection of all the bloodshed in the galaxy sprung up in all its hideous forms, to blood the plains of Jerkasi. The battlefield of Gorgath is ever changing, filled with the ruins of fortresses and of cities razed, only so they can fall again to siege. Here is a weapon of fiendish design, wrought low by spears and flint arrowheads. There are cavalry in their finery, cut apart by bullets and scorched by mechanical flame. There can be no tactic for victory, for Gorgoth despises victory, and its battlefields deformed to deny any ruse, no matter how brilliant. Only bloodlust and hatred can win the day at Gorgoth, and then only until the next day, when a new war blooms across the corpse-strewn plains. What can Gorgoth be? A creature with sentience of its own? With violence for lifeblood and warfare for breath? A machine for the blooding of Jakasi's armies, whose lords feed their underlings through Gorgoth, to take command of the bloody veterans that emerge. Or some conglomeration of chaos, some function of the ever-changing warp, bled through into flesh and blood. Not one of these questions troubles the mind of Gorgoth's killers, for they are truly its children, devoted to it and yet despising it, trapped in the war machine, the age of slaughter, the one true battlefield that is Gorgoth. Mind Journeys of a Heretic Saint by Inquisitor Helmander Oswin, suppressed by the Order of the Ordo Hereticus. The strongest slaves were up on the deck, forcing the hecatomb along with poles, as gangs of scaphulids slogged their way to the shore, hauling ropes tied to the ship's prow. Alric, the strongest of all the slaves, was up near the stern. It was the first time he had got a good look at the hecatomb from the outside. By the Emperor, it was ugly. Just a car, said a voice behind Alric. Alric turned to see Hogan's, the member of Erkar's faithful who had spoken to him at the prayer meeting. I heard you speak with Erkar. Before Gaul? Asked Alric. Yes. Though it was not for my ears. I merely seek to understand what is happening on this world. I intend to survive it. Lieutenant does not think my faith is strong enough to be indoctrinated in the truth he sees, continued Hogan's. He would not have told me about the Hammer of Demons. I am just the kind of weak-willed man who would lose his faith if he understood it. But your faith is not gone? Hogan shrugged. I don't have much else. I lose my faith, and what am I? Not much. Less than that. I've been one of Gareth's men. I've given up my being human. Listen, Justicar, I knew more than Erkar thinks I do. I was there on the Pax, And I know where this religion comes from. Erkard gives us readings from religious texts he has. I have been unable to follow their meaning many times. I don't see this place in the same colors as Erkard does. Have you seen this text? I haven't seen it, but it exists. I don't think Erkard wrote it either. I don't believe he had it before we were brought to Jakasi. He had it. He found it here? Perhaps. I don't know, but Justicar. If the Hammer of Demons is more than just an idea, maybe it's here, and we can grasp and use it. Perhaps it can get us off this planet. If it can, if there's even a chance, then you have to find it. Emperor knows a sinner like me can't do much. But you're a space marine. You can do anything. Not quite, Brother Hoggins, said Alric. Can you get this book? Not without killing Erkar, said Hoggins. And I won't do that. I believe in him, Justicar. Whether he's right about the hammer or anything else, is the only thing that kept any of the crew of the Pax alive. The hammer is real, said Alric. And if it can be found, I will find it. If it's a weapon, Justicar, you're the one who's going to have to wield it. I would look forward to it. If it can help us fight back. One of the scaphoids lashed the whip at Hoggins. Hoggins scowled and went back to his post. Only chaos would create a place like Gorgoth. It's like chocolatey or something. Only chaos would create a place like Gorgoth, thought Alric. And only the followers of Khorne would do it with such blunt, literal brutality. Columns of red-robed cultists and wild mutants marched on either shore of the Blood River, following armored champions towards Gorgoth's endless battle. Alric could hear the sound of its devastation, and could even make out the outline of a feral titan as it lumbered towards the firing indiscriminately. Everywhere were the scars of war, bones poking from barren soil, the foundations of long-fallen fortresses, monuments and mass graves. This was where the army that had taken Sathis Majoris was first blooded. It was a factory for war, a machine for churning out armies, where the dregs of GvG were fed into the battlefield and transformed into instruments of chaos. Aura could see hundreds of thousands of them. Gorgoth was an obscenity. It was a celebration of war for its own sake. Death without purpose, and a dreadful slaughter that offended Alric to the core. The Hecatomb ground its way through the ruins of the barricade, still trapped with the blackened skeletons of those who fought over it decades before. The great dark stain of battle emerged on the horizon, shot with plumes of fire, the feral titans stalking through the carnage, and ragged banners streaming everywhere. At the heart of it stood Gorgoth's arena. Centuries before, one of Gorgoth's most creative and brutal warlords had decided to create slaughter on such scale that would forever be remembered on Jakasi. He enslaved an army and put it to work mining beneath Gorgoth's tortured earth, tunneling around charnel pits and buried war machines until they reached the site of some of the fiercest fighting. Then the warlord's slaves carted huge amounts of explosives into the tunnels and laid them there, waiting for the battle above to reach a peak. They prayed for destruction, and wound explosive caches with prayers of fire and horror. When the time came, they detonated them and let Khorne's holy fire wipe them from the surface of Jakasi. The explosion was heard all across Jakasi. The towers of Azaldine shook, and Gal's shanties collapsed. Hundreds of thousands died in moments. Ash and shattered stone rained down over Gorgoth for a week afterwards. The debris and dead formed a dark cloud that some said had never fully cleared away. No one remembered the name of the warlord, but the crater remained, and on Lord Ebendrake's orders, it had been cleared out and made ready as Gorgoth's grand arena. It was the smell of Gorgoth and a taste of it on the air that really got to Alric. It hit him as Venaliter slaves were driven between two huge blocks of ruined fortifications towards the arena. It tasted like fear, blood, and voided bowels, gun smoke, and fragments of steel. It smelt of smoldering bodies and dust from collapsed buildings. The engine smoke from the feral titans completed it. Alric had been at 1,000 battles, and Gorgoth felt like every one of them distilled and mixed into one experience. The fortifications crawled with spectators. They had been taken off the front lines to celebrate Lord Ebendrake's impending crusade. They threw rocks and filth down at the slaves as they marched, heads bowed, under the eyes of Venaliter's slavers. "What are we facing?" asked Gareth. The man had sought out Alric and made sure he marched alongside the Grey Knight. "I don't know," said Alric. "Come on, you've got your plan. You think no one saw you? What you pulled at Gal? You know enough, Space Marine. Some of us would like to be in on it." "What did you do?" "Do? When?" "Those are prison tattoos. You asked me a question, now I'm asking you. What did you do to get thrown in prison before Venaliter captured you?" "Rule 1. You never ask that, not of any man. Then you don't need to be a part of whatever plan I might have in mind." "Hey, I didn't say that." A huge pair of doors stood in front of the slaves. Made of sheets of salvaged metal welded together, two belching tanks stood ready to pull them apart on lengths of chain. Alric recognized the tanks as Lehman Russ tank variants, no doubt captured and brought to Jacassi and one of the Lord's slave raids. "Murder," said Gareth. "All right, happy?" "Who did you kill?" Gareth swallowed. Yet he had never seen him. Alric had never seen him anything less than completely confident. But that was a question Gareth obviously feared. "Women. Why?" "What do you mean, why? Why does anyone do anything?" Gareth scowled. "I don't have to give you a reason." "So you don't know why?" "I will call on you when the time comes." Gareth stepped out of the line, dropping back through the slaves to get away from Alric. A slave that Alric did not recognize shuffled through the filth of rain. "Astartes!" It hissed through a hair lip. Alric peered beneath the slave's hooded rags. Its face was disfigured with some sort of skin disease, so the only recognizable features were two watery eyes. "You know me. Your fame grows." "Who are you?" "I saw you at Gal. I fled from there to follow you." Alric sneered. On every imperial world, there was some diversion for the citizens. And adoring followers accompanied the most famous fighters or sportsmen everywhere. Dracassi's arenas held the same position on a far larger scale. The idea that Alric should have devotees seemed as pathetic as the slave looked. "Go home to Gaul." "There is no home there now. I bring you a gift." The slave produced an axe from beneath his robes. It was clearly made for a fighter of a space marine size, the haft too broad and weighty to fit a normal man's hand. It was bright and gleaming, with a head from the shape of the crescent moon, so sharp that the edge was transparent and glowing. "From the forge," said the slave. Alric took the axe. It was weighed perfectly. It was weighted perfectly. Alric had rarely held a weapon of such craftsmanship, even in the artificer's halls on Terra. Who made this? Demanded Alric. The city's forge lies at the crossroads, said the slave. 2 fortresses and the siege works between them. That is all he told me to say. Who? Who told you? A whip lashed around the throat of the slave, yanking him back. The slave was dragged back into the knot of Gorga's soldiers, and Alric knew that in a few moments the man would be dead beneath the boots and blades. The slaves around Alric surged on beneath the soldiers' whips, and Alric lost sight of the slave. He looked down at the axe. It was perhaps the first beautiful thing he had seen on Jacassi. In front of him, the tanks gunned their engines, and the doors were pulled apart. 2 massive armies were revealed on the arena floor, lined up in ranks, banners streaming. The ground between them was patrolled by bloodletters, snarling at the front ranks to keep them back. A pack of the demons stomped up to Venaliter's slaves and began directing the gladiators onto the ranks, splitting them between the 2 sides. A battle, of course. It was the only way that Khorne could be celebrated in Gorgith. Why is this? Why is this? Why is this crooked? Why is this crooked? Why is this crooked? I don't know why this is crooked. Why is this crooked? Oh, man. It's hung up. Okay, that's not bad. I thought there was some sort of critical failure in the pulley system, but it was caught. It was just caught. Quite magnificent, said Venaliter, taking up his position beside Lord Ebendrake at the top of the stands. Every arena had a place for Jocasi's lords to spectate, away from the crowds, and in Gorgith it took the form of a covered section of seating with chained demons broken and bound to serve the planet's rulers. They skulked and cowered like beaten dogs, and around Lord Ebendrake's feet. Ebendrake and Venaliter ignored them. They were here to witness the games, not to be fawned over. Indeed it is, said Lord Ebendrake, settling his enormous reptilian body on the throne erected for him in the stands. The lords have outdone themselves. Khorne anticipates greatly. And not just the bloodshed, said Venaliter. I would have thought the most appropriate celebration was slaughter. But of course, this is much more appealing to the Lord of Battles. Ebendrake turned his great head towards Venaliter and narrowed his eyes. Your flatteries are disappointing, Duke, he said, flicking a forked tongue dangerously over his teeth. I had thought more of you than this. I had thought you had some imagination. You misunderstand me, Lord, said Venaliter. Do not think I have been modest. My very best are down there, including your Grey Knight. Of course. You would risk him here? The blood god would not hold me in high regard if I could not risk everything to worship him, replied Venaliter slickly. My Grey Knight would do none of us any good back on the Hecatomb. You have great plans for him, I feel. So do you, Lord Ebendrake. Ebendrake smiled, baring his spectacular array of teeth. He will try to get out. He will want revenge. That would be a spectacle worth seeing. Ebendrake's enclosure was ringed with Ophidian Guard warriors. The audience was little danger at that moment, since all eyes were fixed in anticipation on the battle lines below. The slaves were divided into two armies and kept separate by a host of bloodletters. Huge banners hung above the front ranks, dripping power from the runes painted on them. Each army had tens of thousands of men, from frenzied cultists from the slums of Gaul to tribesmen from beyond Drakasi's cities, and even elite gladiators from the personal stables of lords like Venaliter. More than a few of the spectators recognized the Venaliter's most prized possession, the captive Grey Knight, known to many of them as Alric the Betrayed, who is destined to die competing for the mantle of Drakasi's champion at Velscon a few weeks before. That was, of course, if he made it out of Gorgith. There were brute mutants 3 times the height of a man, tentacled subhumans, and hated psychers, chained up and herded before the armies to make sure they died first. Whole cults of the blood god stood in their robed finery, desperate to die beneath the eyes of their god. At a signal from Lord Ebendrake, one of his Ophidian guard raised the war horn and blew a single discordant note. The banners dipped, and the blood letters dissolved into the floor of the crater. The armies swarmed forwards. The spectators erupted in celebration. They had been a part of the hellish machinery of Gorgith for so long. Now that they were on the outside, looking down at the others fighting for their pleasure, as if they were Khorne, soaking up the adulation of their bloodshed. It was the most glorious thing they had ever seen. The front lines collided with the thunderclap. Bodies were thrown into the air. Heads parted from bodies. Torsos split open. Men swarmed over a brute mutant, dragging it down to cut it to pieces. A rattle of bodies heaved up as the dead piled on top of one another, and soon the armies were battling atop a rampart of the dead. Alric the Betrayed was at the heart of it all. With his bright silver axe and ornate armor, he cut a more dramatic figure than any other gladiator. He kicked enemies and friends aside as he drove his way through the battle. Other slaves of Venalitors followed in his wake, an Eldar swordsman cutting enemies apart with his chain blade, a host of human butchers who dispatched wounded foes on the ground. It seemed that Alric had finally lost his mind and become one with the blood god's will. Here was a hunter of demons, the Emperor's finest, out slaughtering Drakasi's most brutal for the glory of Khorne. Drakasi drove for the closest edge of the arena. Alric drove for the closest edge of the arena. A tentacled monster tried to snare him and drag him down, but Alric stamped down on his torso, crushing its rib cage before slicing through its tentacles with a deep sweep of his axe. One of the captive witches lurched towards him, lightning crashing. Alric took the first bolt, letting it discharge through his armor and arc into the earth. A single step brought him face to face with the witch, and he slammed the blade of the axe through its skull. There was nothing the spectators of Gorgas loved more than seeing the weak-willed psychers put to death. Some of them began chanting Alric's name. One of his side standard bearers was fighting near Alric. It was an armored warrior from the bodyguard of one of Drakasi's lords. The warrior was badly hurt, blood pouring from the shoulder point of his armor. His helm split and gory. Alric pushed him to the ground and took up the banner. He held it up so the whole stadium could see the image of the stylized skulls emblazoned on it. Alric ran up to the edge of the arena's seating, which sloped up above him along the curve of the crater's edge. He hurled the banner into the stands. Dozens of soldiers leapt up to catch it. "What are you waiting for?" yelled Alric. The crowd responded by chanting his name ever louder as they poured down past him, off the stands, into the arena. This was war, and suddenly watching wasn't enough. "Clever boy," said Ebendrake as he watched the crowd around Alric break ranks and pour down into the arena. "My lord," said Venaliter, this blasphemy is... "You have said enough, Duke," said Ebendrake. "Commander?" One of the Ophidian guard, hulking and sinister behind the visor of his black armor, turned to Ebendrake. "My lord, killed the Grey Knight," said Ebendrake. Incoherency level 15%. Expired IPA left 66%. Oh fuck, it's still up there. Come on. Alric fought against the tide. His head was forced under the sea of bodies. and he fought to breathe. His own name, chanted over and over again, was a din crashing of the ocean. His was not a complicated plan. Khorne probably would have approved. The bloodlust of Gorga's soldiers, ingrained by generations of carnage, only needed the right kind of impetus to send them swarming into the arena to join in. All Alaric had to do was get out. He had been sent a message, and to discover its meaning, he had to break out of the arena and into Gorgeth. Alaric kicked his way out of the crowd, clambering over them until he found the top of the arena floor wall. He hauled himself up into the seating that had been erected around the sides of the arena crater. The battle swarmed beneath him, all the battle lines now lost in a swirl of violence. The lords would be angry. There was plenty of blood, of course, and Khorne would have his due, but a free-for-all wasn't what the lords of Drakasi had wanted. Alric's riot was an insult to the planet's ruling order. Lord Ebendrake was ahead of Alric, advancing behind a line of Ophidian guard. Alric's heart sank. All he had to do was get out. Ebendrake was not part of this plan. "Grey Knight!" roared Ebendrake. "Betrayed of the corpse god! Puppet of Khorne! Is this the vengeance you seek, to face me and slay me in my own domain?" The Ophidian guard were moving towards him, black swords drawn. Alaric wouldn't get his vengeance. Ebendrake wouldn't roll over and die for him. But he was human, and that meant fighting on. Ebendrake inhaled, his wings spreading out behind him. Alaric hit the floor. Ebendrake breathed a sheet of black flame that flowed around Alaric like water. It scorched him down one side, and he rolled away from it, trying to smother the flames before they caught on his flesh. The sound was like a hurricane of fire, roaring in his ears. The Ophidian guard kept advancing straight through the flame, their armor proof against it. Alaric couldn't fight Ebendrake, not without being immolated by black fire again. He was going to die. He jumped to his feet. The Ophidian guard were upon him, and he lashed out at them, smashing one black, eyeless helm apart with his axe. Another forced forward, trying to pull him on the ground, but Alaric slammed a knee onto his face and threw him aside. "What victory do you believe you will win, little creature?" growled Ebendrake. Black fire coiling from between his fangs. He loomed up over the line of Ophidian guard protecting him and cast off his cloak as his wings unfurled fully. "What can you take from me?" The Ophidian guard around Alaric closed ranks and raised their swords like executioners, waiting for the word so they could take his head. "Kill me and you kill Drakasi. Is that correct?" Ebendrake grinned horribly through his anger, his eye slits of yellow fire. "Is that the sum of your imagination?" Ebendrake looked past Alaric suddenly. The roar behind Alaric grew, like a wave crashing through the arena. He risked a look behind him. Tens of thousands of Gorgoth soldiers swarmed up the seating behind him. At their head was the banner Alaric had thrown them. They wanted to fight, and perhaps to die. For that they needed the best opponent in the arena. All the finest gladiators were tied up in the melee on the arena floor, and that left the Ophidian guard. "Kill him!" shouted Ebendrake as the spontaneous army charged. "Close ranks!" A sword came down. Alaric was faster. He brought his axe up through the visor of the helmet looming over him and rammed an elbow into the throat of the Ophidian guard behind him. His would-be executioner fell, head split apart, and the second guard tumbled as Alric cut a leg out from under him. Ebendrake breathed. The flame rippled over Alric's head, and the army charging the Ophidian guard. Men disappeared in swathes of black fire. Alric was only half aware of being carried up into the shoulders of the army, even as they burned and vanished beneath the Ophidian swords. He saw the banner still held high and realized that he, like the banner, was a symbol of rebellion and war for these people. The broken creatures wanted nothing more than to follow Alric to their deaths, because they knew that no one on Jacassi could die as well as a space marine. Somewhere amid the carnage, Ebendrake wolfed a clawful of Gorgoth's soldiers down his gullet to quench his anger. The lords had lost control of Gorgoth's arena completely. He turned from the carnage in disgust. The rioting soldiers were too lowly a prey for him. Alric had disappeared into the rioting mass, and there was nothing worthwhile for him to kill anymore. Alric watched the fire starting to burn and the drifts of dead building up at the edges of the arena until this tide of soldiers carried him through the dimness of an archway and out to the war city of Gorgoth. Replenishing spoiled liquor. $6 means getting shit-faced around here. I have an alliance. I have an alliance with the Hachi Mart. They sell me spoiled liquor. They know I'll buy everything out if they just give me enough time, so they have the shelf for it. It's not that bad, okay? Look, it's like it tastes worse than what it normally would, but it's just the carbonation's all messed up. It's like the stuff. It's like some idiot refrigerated all of them. Oh no! Oh, I bet you. No, here's what happened: is they were all in they were probably in the fridge. And they were like, "This is not making very much money. This is not what refrigerating them in 100 and something degree heat. So take them out." And so it fucked up all the carbonation. That's what happened. Yeah, hell yeah. That's hella what happened. I'm glad it happened though. I'm hella glad no one bought these. They're not like sophisticated like I am. But yeah, I'm getting shit faced tonight for $6 fucking bucks. The biggest bottles also have the highest alcohol like content. I mean, yeah, it's shitty, but like the first people in like fucking Babylon or whatever the fuck, the first people they like drank like it was some dude drinking out of like rainwater that had like oats and stuff in it that had been out there for a while. So I mean, it's like that's like high gross. What I'm doing is only medium gross. It's not only even like full gross. Like what they did was like extra gross. What I'm doing is just halfway gross, and that's how I rationalize it. Can't wait to figure out what the flaw with this one is. Gorgot's nights were cold. They killed off the day's wounded, so that only the worthy and fit could fight in the morning. Alric did not feel the cold as men did. He knew that his night might kill a weak man, but it meant nothing to him. He wished he could feel it and fear it, because that would be something he could understand, something he could grasp. It was an enemy he could defeat. Find shelter, build a fire. Chikasi was an enemy he could not face like that. There was no simple solution to do it. If he could feel the cold, at least he could take some pride from the fact that he was still alive. If Eben Drake had died, what would have been achieved? Eben Drake himself had seen through that. If the dragon was gone, something else would take its place. Perhaps Venaliter, perhaps Argothrax, or perhaps some ancient horror of Jakasi that Alric hadn't even heard of. Alric had reached the siege works a few hours after the army escaped from Gorgas Arena and took the carnage out into the city. He had left the army behind as he made for the twin fortresses. He didn't care what happened to the rioters. They were probably being put down to avenge the insult of the failed Gorgoth games. Alric walked carefully through the trench. It had been dug decades ago when the two fortresses had evidently been at war, and their lords had ordered the trenches dug to approach the opposite fortress and take it. The siege lines had passed one another in a web of tunnels and crisscrossing trenches, and there were still signs of the struggle, old broken bones poking from the dark earth, heaps of spent cartridges rusted into lumps of red-brown corrosion. Each fortress was a war-scarred cylinder, bristling with rusted guns and gouged by the siege engines that lay in ruins around them. Alric could almost hear the din of the guns and the screams of the dying. He wondered for a moment how many had died there, fighting a miniature war in the midst of Gorgas' grand battle. But there did not seem to be room in the city for any more death. There was a temple ahead, lying at the place where the siege lines had first met. It was built from shell casings, from massive artillery shells carved into fluted columns, the individual bullets forming the teeth of the gargoyles squatting on its roof. Through the shattered windows, Alric could see the abandoned forges and anvils, piles of flawed swords and rusted ingots. A forge door swung open, exposing the dark and cold inside. The temple's altar had been used as an anvil and was covered in deep scars. Alric walked carefully inside. He could smell the smoke and molten metal and almost hear the ringing of the hammer on a newly forged blade. The place was abandoned. It had been for some time. Since he had received the axe of the games to the arena, Alric had believed, somewhere inside him, that the smith who had spoken to him at the carnival was trying to give him a message. He didn't even know if the smith had been an ally or an enemy, or even a figment of his own imagination. However, He was a potential ally, and Alric knew he needed one outside the Hecatomb. He really thought that he would find something here. Certainly no more than he thought he could kill Lord Ebendrake alone. Something glinted in the dimness of the abandoned temple. Alric pulled aside a few unfurnished blades and saw a hammer propped up against the altar wall. Its head was bright silver and carved with images of a comet streaking down to shatter a planet, an armored fist clutching a lightning bolt, and a dragon with a sword through its heart. Alric picked up the weapon and felt its weight. It was as finely made as the axe. He recalled how Brother Vorn would have dearly loved to wield such a brutal-looking weapon, and wondered whether Vorn and his battle brothers had made it off Sarthus Majoris alive and free. On one face of the hammer, the face that would strike the enemy where the hammer was swung, was the image of a skull. One eye was blanked out. The other burned with an intricately carved flame. Alric stared at the image for a long moment, trying to guess what the message could possibly be. That it was a message was obvious. For him to seek this place out, to risk his life escaping the arena, there had to be a point. A half-blinded skull? It had to mean something, even if the meaning came from within him. Perhaps the skull represented Alric. With the collar of corn around his neck, he was half-blind. There is no hammer of demons, said Alric. There is no sacred weapon waiting to be wielded. It's me. I'm supposed to bring this planet down. I am the hammer. What if the hammer of demons was another chaos trick? It would be typical of the followers of chaos to perpetrate such a hoax. If only to give desperate humans a shadow of hope that could be snatched away. Alric wanted to have faith in something, even if it was only a decent way to die in Dracasi. But there was nothing left for him to believe in. A sound snapped Alric out of his thoughts. Something was moving outside, a footstep through the loose rubble, shifting weight in the debris. Alric took his axe in one hand and the hammer in the other, sure by their balance that they had been forged by the same master smith. He heard more footsteps, voices, and swords unsheathed. Alric tensed. He faced the door, his back to the altar, sure that he would cover the distance in a few huge strides, shatter the first visored face he saw with the hammer, and cut the legs out from the other with the axe. He was ready. One side of the temple collapsed with the roar of torn metal and stone, and a rhino APC rode up through the metal into the temple. Alric had to vault over the altar to avoid being dragged beneath its tracks. The side hatch swung open, and a pair of Ophidian guard emerged, not in the hulking armor of Ebendrake's bodyguard, but wearing chainmail and leather, faces obscured by leather masks, wielding whips that shone like bright silver. They lashed out at Alric. He let one whip twine around the haft of his axe and yanked it out of the warrior's hands. But the other caught him across the shoulder, and hot white pain lanced through him. He convulsed onto his knees, swinging blindly with the hammer, feeling it crunch into bone, but unable to see what he had hit. Ophidian guards stormed in through the doors and windows of the temple. There were dozens of them. More emerged from the rhino, slashing with their whips. Alric stood and fought back, pulling them into striking range and battering them down to the floor. But there were too many of them. He was on all fours, pain streaking down through him like lightning bolts. He caught a whip-wielding soldier with the hammer, shattering his knee, and then cut off the head as he lay writhing on the floor. He cut up into the torso of another and forced himself onto his feet, but the Ophidian guards surrounding him carried tower shields emblazoned with white dragons, which they used to slam him back. as he tried to break free of them. He was on his back. His body fought on, but something in the back of his mind told him to give in. It was a part of him that had been given free rein by the call of corn, a hidden coward that had finally surfaced to tell him he was going to fail. He reared up one last time, silencing the coward. He roared like an animal. A great cold weight pressed down on his back, mirrored by the heat blossoming in his chest. He looked down to see the tip of a black sword emerging from his breastbone. He tried to look up and glimpsed the Ophidian guard, who had just impaled him, towering over him. Alric tried to slide off the blade, but it would not move. The shock of it finally caught up with his mind, and the world grayed out. The blade snapped, and Alric slumped to the floor, the tip of the blade still sticking out of his chest. It didn't matter whether he gave in or not. The pain won, and Alric passed out. R.I.P. to my shirt. I see you have thought about what I said. Durndon's voice was low and quiet. Very different from the strident tones he used on the pupil. I see you have thought what I... I see you have thought about what I said. Durndon's voice was low and quiet. Very different from the strident tones he used on the pupil while reminding the Grey Knights of their duties towards the Emperor. I have, said Alric. Around him was the subdued majesty of the chapel of Mandulis. It was built of somber stone, the columns holding up the ceiling carved in the representations of past Grand Masters who had fallen in battle against the demon. However, instead of having granite halls inscribed with the names of fallen Grey Knights, the chapel was open to the outside, and through its columns could be glimpsed an endless golden desert under a dark blue twilight. Strange stars winked out in the sky, the same shining constellations that bled from the eye of terror. Alric was sitting on one of those stone pews. Durandon was a couple of rows in front of him, evidently at prayer, since he was not wearing the black trimmed power armor that was the badge of a chaplain's office. Alric realized he was without armor too. He was wearing the remains of a badly battered breastplate in the shape of folded wings, and the point of a black sword stuck out of his chest. "And," said Durandon, "you were wrong." "Really?" "Some things you can't fight." "Interesting. Do you believe that these Grand Masters would have thought that? That Mandulis could have come up against a foe and said, 'This I cannot fight'?" Alric looked at the column that represented Mandulis. The Grand Master had carried a sword, with the hilt worked to resemble a lightning bolt. And Alric had that sword, and tried to echo the deeds of Mandulis in vanquishing the demon prince, Gargulloth. But those events felt like they belonged in another man's lifetime. "I am not one of those Grand Masters," replied Alric. "No, you are not. Not if you are going to simply give up." "I am not giving up, chaplain." "Then what, Alric? What quality do you possess that can win you victory if not a Grey Knight's willingness to fight?" "Imagination." Durandon laughed. It was a strange thing to see the old man doing so. "Really, how so?" "It is the understanding that there is more than one way to fight." "I see. So you think that bringing the bolter and blade to them is not enough? You seek another way?" "Yes. I learned that against Ebendrake. I cannot fight them as I would any other enemy. Not this whole planet. Even if I win, every drop of blood I spill is a victory for them. It has to be something else." "Then what?" "I do not know." Alric sat back, feeling the strength bleed out of him. "And you think that I give you answers?" "I don't know what I think." Durandon stood up and smoothed down the devotional robes. He walked up to the chapel's altar and took a brazier from its stone slab. An icon of the Emperor looked down on the chaplain as one by one he lit the candles and incense lanterns arranged around the altar. It was an ancient ritual, reflecting the lights that had gone out in the souls of so many Grey Knights since the chapter's foundation, and reminding the Grey Knights who still lived that their battle brothers' souls were gathering to fight alongside the Emperor at the end of time. Alric imagined those souls gathering like fireflies around a pyre, eager to fight, and he felt sorry for them. For the first time, it occurred to him that their sacrifice might not be worth anything at all. "I cannot give you answers to this, Alric," said Durandon. "I think you come to me more in hope than in expectation, and I must disappoint you. I was given the chaplain's burden because I am exactly the opposite of you. I see only the Grey Knight's way, the endless battle against chaos. Everything else must be seen through that lens. There can be no doubt and no compromise in the eyes of a chaplain. You are alone, Justicar, as are we all." Then I do not think I can do this, said Alric. My duties under Kasi are clear. Chaos must be punished. The Emperor's justice must be done. But I am just one man, and the lords of Dracasia are so many and so strong. It is just as Venaliter said. I can either die here accomplishing nothing, or fight on and win renown for their blood god. I cannot win. Then that is your fate, Alric. A Grand Master would never accept that, of course. But, as you said, you are not a Grand Master. Please, it is best that you leave now. You are bleeding on the floor of my chapel, and it is an ill omen. Alric looked down on his chest. The wound was bleeding, blood flowing in time with the pumping of his heart. The blood was trickling down the pew and pooling around his feet. Am I going to die? Durandon looked around and about him, but Alric could not read his expression. If I was to say yes, what would you feel? Relieved, said Alric. The choice would have been made for me, but Jocassi would carry on as before. So I suggest you live. I'll see what I can do. Good luck, Justicar. Perhaps I can meet with you again. The real me. I mean, back on Titan. I imagine I would be very interested to learn of these conversations. Goodbye, Chaplain. Durandon looked away. As he turned, his features melted away and left him without a face. The features of the Grand Masters dissolved away too, leaving columns of smooth, unmarked stone. One by one, the stars outside began to go out, and the chapel of Mandulis withered away into the desert. Alric took a long, painful breath, and the darkness lifted. You know, where I come from, back in back around town. What we like to call what Alric has is, my friend, it is called schizophrenia. Oh yes, Alric has constructed. Alric has constructed an entire persona for the chaplain. Ain't that something, folks? An entire persona. Which he can emulate whatever he wants. The thing is, right, is like, I mean, I would say that the persona, it has like a will of its own in a way. It's not like, it's mostly like Alric's like Alric created it, but it has a little like guidance of its own, and that's what makes it valuable. That's why it's not just Alric talking to himself, and that's why it's something else. But I mean, I've read about miracles, or at least, in the Horus Heresy, that there are miracles that happen because of the Emperor, literal miracles. Alric, Alric awoke to light. He lay on his back, staring up. He blinked a few times as his eyes adjusted. He wondered, not for the first time on Jakasi, whether he was dead. The light coming from a chandelier hanging from the ceiling fresco with images of battle. Victims were painted lying in heaps beneath the feet of armored warriors, all of them with the sigils of corn glowing on their armor. The sky above writhed with blood-laden clouds, and carrion demons swept in to tear apart the living and the dead. Titanic armies clashed in the distance. It was a work of genius. The artist would have been one of the greatest of his generation on any imperial world. Perhaps good enough to gain sector-wide recognition. Instead, the mind behind the work had been enslaved by chaos, withered away by madness until unholy masterpieces were all that was left. Alric wondered who that person had been. Had he been insane to begin with? Tortured and brilliant? Listening to the whispers of the warp for solace? Or had he been just one of the millions of citizens preyed upon by Jakasi's forces? Alric imagined the nameless artist, huddled among a great cloud of other terrified citizens, waiting for death. Perhaps perhaps praying for deliverance, or trying to offer some comfort to his loved ones. Then the death had come, but not for him. Jakasi's servants had found out about his skill and chosen him to live on enslaved, and had rotted his mind away until visions of bloodshed and war were all that he could create. He must have wished he were dead. Perhaps he was still alive somewhere in Jakasi, still creating horrors for corn. Alric lay still for a long time. It was only by the Emperor's grace that he was not dead or insane, too. He wondered how easily he could break. It would take longer to break Alric than to corrupt the painter who had created the image above him. But how much longer? As the galaxy reckoned things, probably not a great deal. Alric tried to sit up, but the pain inside him was a hot red spike piercing his torso. He gasped and fell back. Beneath him was an unyielding surface, and Alric wondered if it was a mortuary slab and a cathedral of the blood god. And if he was finally dead, he turned his head. He was lying on a huge hardwood table laid as if for a feast. Bronze plates and chalices had been pushed to one side so that he could be laid there. The table was one of several in the grand feasting chamber, as dark and lavish as anything Alric had seen on Jakasi. The walls were hung with silken drapes of crimson and black, held up by false columns of black marble. The floor looked at first like marble, but at a closer look revealed that it was paved with gravestones in so many different styles that they must have been brought from many different worlds. Devotional inscriptions of Imperial Gothic marched past Alric's eyes. The names of the desecrated dead. An altar to corn stood at one end of the room. It was a great, irregular chunk of stone, stained black, and covered in ancient gouges, an executioner's block. Behind it was the symbol of corn, wrought in brass and inlaid with red lacquer. It was the symbol of a skull, so stylized that it was little more than a triangle topped with a cross. Never more a Nevertheless, it radiated such malice that it hurt to look at. The floor in front of the block had drains to carry away the blood. The executioner's block was still used for its original purpose. Alric tested his body for injuries. It felt comforting because it was part of his training. There was still enough Grey Knight left in him to act like a soldier. He had the familiar cacophony of pain from hundreds of minor injuries. His chest was the worst. His breathing was hampered, and one of his hearts was wounded. He could still move and fight if need be, but it was a major injury, even for a space marine, and back on Titan, he would have been sent to the Apothecarian to recover. On Drakasi, he would have been sent to fight through it. One of the drapes was pulled aside. Beyond it, Alric glimpsed more finery, a magnificent chamber, surrounding a grand staircase lined with brass statues. Haggard entered the feasting chamber. He looked completely out of place, unkempt and grimy, like all the slaves, wearing his stained surgeon's apron. That Alric wondered for a moment if he wasn't really there at all. "You're awake," said Haggard. "So it seems. How are you?" "I live." "It was a real mess in there," continued Haggard. "One of the lungs won't work. One of the hearts is looking shaky too. Your spine made it, that's the main thing. There were splinters of metal in there as long as my finger. It was only by the Emperor's will that none of them severed your spinal cord." "Thank you, Haggard," said Alric. "I don't know if I could have survived without your help." "Don't thank me," said Haggard. "Please don't thank me. I don't know what happened next." Alric tried sitting up again. This time he bit down the pain. A few of Haggard's crude stitches burst, and fresh blood ran down his chest. He saw that he was wearing the armor in which he had been fighting at Gorgoth, with the breastplate removed. The wound in his chest was huge and ugly. No one but a space marine could have survived it. "Whatever happens, Haggard, I'm better facing it alive," said Alric. "I pulled this out of you," said Haggard. He held out the shard of the Ophidian Guard's sword. In his hand, it was the size of a short sword, the broken haft like a hilt, the edge and point still sharp enough to glow in the candlelight. "You didn't really think you could kill Evandrake, did you?" "Our meeting was unplanned," replied Alric. "I wonder if anyone on this planet could kill that." He looked down at the shard in Haggard's hand. "Can you hide that among your medical gear?" "It certainly looks painful enough," said Haggard, slipping into one of the pockets of his stained apron where he kept his makeshift surgical tools. "Keep it for when I return to the Hecatomb. Speaking of which, where am I?" "Still on board," said Haggard. "These are Venalitor's chambers. Here? The ship isn't big enough." Haggard shrugged. "Physics only works out here out of habit. If Venalitor wants the Bennett to give himself a place fit for a duke, then he can. Listen, Justicar, it was Venalitor who brought me here to keep you alive. Whatever he's going to do, he needs you alive and conscious to do it. He's going to punish you." "He doesn't know I'm awake." Haggard looked at the floor. "Yes, he does, Justicar." The sound of scapholid claws on the gravestone tiles was unmistakable. So were the armored footsteps descending the marble staircase. An under guard of scaphoids clattered down to the room, pulling Haggard away. Haggard didn't resist. Duke Venalitor followed them in. He was surrounded by scapholid slavers, carrying shock prods. He dismissed them with a wave of his hand, and they scuttled away. Behind him, Alric could see Haggard, herded up the staircase. "So, Justicar," said Venalitor. He studied his surroundings perfectly. The dark magnificence of his chambers matched his own, with his splendid red and black armor and the multitude of swords at his back. The place was a reflection, like Venaliter herself, of pure arrogance. Alric didn't reply. Venaliter had deliberately made himself vulnerable without his attendant slavers, but Alric was wounded and unarmed. Venaliter would kill him if he and Alric fought, and Venaliter wanted to remind Alric of that fact. Venaliter walked past him and knelt in front of the altar to Khorne, whispering a few words of prayer. The blood god, he said, turning back to Alric, listens. When you have learned his respect as I have, he hears you. I ask for strength to conquer, and I am granted it. I ask for armies, and they march under my banner. They call you Alric the Betrayed, because you were betrayed by your emperor. You asked him to deliver you from chaos, from Drakasi, and he ignored you. He is just a corpse. Who cannot hear your prayers, Grey Knight? That is the ultimate betrayal. My lord will grant you everything you want, if only you get his attention. Alric climbed off the table and stood. He was unsteady on his feet, but he did everything he could not to show it. He could fight here and die. At least it would be over. At least he wouldn't have to listen to Venaliter's blasphemous words anymore. You had that chance, Alric, continued Venaliter. You are asking me to join you, Alric smiled. Only in desperation would anyone think such a thing was possible. You have seen the scum of Drakasi's cities, said Venaliter unshaken. You have mingled with the even lower vermin of Hecatomb, those killers, those broken men, the violent dregs of your Imperium. That is the lot of the great majority of those who come here. Khorne despises them, and they are left to rot or to be killed as fodder for his bloodlust. The lucky ones become sacrifices, but you are different. You do not belong with those scum. You have yet to even glimpse what you could become on Drakasi. The blood god is willing to listen to you. If you will only listen to him, Venaliter indicated the altar. It is so easy, Grey Knight, and it is the only choice you have. No matter what you do or how hard you try, you will die in the blood god's name. The only way out is to bow before a real god for once. Then I will die, said Alric. A few drops of blood, said Venaliter. That is all he requires. You have to wring them out of me. Venaliter shook his head. You try to humiliate me? You even try to cross swords with Lord Ebendrake? The blood god looks upon such atrocity, such audacity, and smiles. That you honestly believe you can win some victory over me is indication of the mental strength of a champion that chaos requires. The fact that you are still alive shows that you have the strength of arms. You could rule the planet, Alric. Then you could do with Ebendrake as you please. You could even put me on this altar and have me slit from neck to belly. If only you do it for Khorne. Never, said Alric. Not as long as I live. Never. You will just have to sacrifice me like all the rest of your vermin. Venaliter smiled. There is something noble in you, I think. The Emperor's lackeys taught you well. I will give them that. Victory means so much to you. And you see in the bleakest of situations, for you, dying here is a victory. My duty allows for no failings, said Alric. And it does not end in death. You cannot defeat that, Duke Venaliter. You had a duty towards Sarthus Majoris, too. Did you not? Alric could not answer. Do you know what we did to that planet? Alric fought for something to say, something that would silence Venaliter, something devastating, but there was nothing. We separated the men from the women, continued Venaliter with a smirk, and we killed the women in front of the men. We killed them badly, in all the ways you can think of, and a few you cannot. Then we let the men fight back. Half of them wanted revenge, and the other half just wanted to die. The grief in their eyes was like a hymn to the blood god. The badness was joyous. So many of them were begging the blood god to take them in, to turn them mindless. Then I made a new army from them and marched them on to the next city. Your duty was to prevent that, Justicar. I think it is fair to say you have failed. Your atrocities are nothing new, said Alric, trying to keep his voice level. We cannot save every world. We can only fight until death. Until death! But you did not die. You are here. Sarthus Majoris died, but you survived. What manner of duty did you fulfill exactly? Your words cannot sway me, Venaliter. I am a Grey Knight. Not anymore. You became something else. Something less, the moment I was able to take you alive. At least your friend had the good grace to die at the first opportunity. You cling on like a disease, pretending there is some victory in your failure to the corpse emperor, and ignoring the only chance for redemption you have, the chance given to Korn. Alric looked around for a weapon. There was nothing of use. It would have had to have been bare hands. I shall be redeemed, Venaliter, here and now. I shall be redeemed. Alric charged Venaliter. The Duke had been at ease, speaking idly as he stood before the altar, but he was still ready. His hand caught Alric by the throat. The other arm knocked away Alric's fist. Then Alator lifted Alric off his feet and threw him back into the table. His body splintered to the table, throwing gilded plates and chalices everywhere. The wound in his chest tore open, and for a moment he was blinded with pain. So you really do want to die? Asked Venaliter. Alric sprang to his feet. The wound in his chest was bleeding freely. Venaliter waved a hand, and the blood formed tendrils that lashed around his neck. He tore them aside, but by the time he had his bearings again, Venaliter had got behind him. Venaliter caught him by the shoulder and the neck and kicked his legs out from under him. Alric fell forwards, and Venaliter thrust him into the executioner's block of the altar. Alaric's head smacked into the throne, and the smell of old dried blood hit him. Venaliter drew a sword from his back, a short curved blade, like a shining razor in the candlelight. He stabbed it into Alaric's back. Venaliter knew the ways in which a human body could be made to feel pain. The tip of the blade hit just the right point, and the nerve endings caught fire in agony. Alric could not move, only spasm on the altar. His pain washed through him.